Hi, it's Kieran Lebates here, and this video is just some musings on a post that Andy Martin posted where he was talking about intellectual property living on a blockchain and being embedded in the blockchain such that the intellectual property rights are inherently protected in the system. And I had some issues with that when I was reading it, and I think it's worth looking at ownership, at intellectual property, and actually other kinds of property that cannot naturally be owned, and finally what a blockchain actually gives you, in order to explain why I am skeptical that intellectual property can be inherently protected by a blockchain, and why it requires courts and ultimately the force of a government in order for the intellectual property ownership to be respected. So if you take simple physical objects like a pocket knife or a coin, and you have an owner, then the meaning of that is that the owner has control over that pocket knife, or they have control over that coin. They can decide whether they hold on to the coin or whether they spend it. They can decide whether they're going to use the penknife or keep it in their pocket or lend it to somebody. And that fundamentally is what ownership boils down to. Now, when you move out into bigger things, or digital or virtual things, then the game changes somewhat. So moving on to something like land, there are cultures who in the past who thought the idea of land ownership was ludicrous. And in fact, you can't own a parcel of land in the same way that you own a gold coin, because you can't carry it around in your pocket. You have to rely either yourself on having an army of people to protect that land, or you have to rely on a government doing it on your behalf. And as a result, land ownership is different to owning a coin or a penknife. Now, when you go to intellectual property, it's even easier for someone to ignore your control over that intellectual property. So if you take an invention or a poem or a song, how can I stop somebody else from singing my song? I can't, unless there is a legal instrument that protects my song as being mine, and where I can resort to the courts in order to stop somebody from singing it. And ultimately, if they decide to ignore the courts, and then the police turn up on their doorstep and cart them off to prison. There's actually probably a fine that would be levied before that, but let's say they didn't pay that. So you can see that intellectual property is different to physical property, and actually even physical property has different categories as well. So a blockchain does give you ownership over a digital entity in somewhat of the way that you can own a coin or a penknife. However, it's a very specific thing that you are owning. And the example I use is that a blockchain allows a person to have control over a row in a database, or a row in a spreadsheet. That's fundamentally what it boils down to. And everybody in the decentralized system has agreed on the rules, and then there are incentives and consensus systems in place to ensure that everything chugs along merrily and doesn't get upset. And you can see that in, for example, proof of work blockchain systems where there's not enough miners, not enough effort being thrown at securing the blockchain, that people can come in and subvert it. So if a blockchain was somehow going to allow me to protect intellectual property such as an invention, I can't really see how it can do that. It can act as a registry that says that I own that, but then I still need to resort to the courts and patent infringement in order to enforce my ownership of the invention. And similarly with copyright materials, if I've written a book and I register that book on a blockchain, that's all very well, but if somebody goes and prints many copies and starts selling them without my permission, again I have to go to the courts, and there's nothing a blockchain can do to stop that. And even if you start looking at esoteric digital rights management systems where I have the book on the blockchain and it's encrypted, and you need to get permission from me to or possibly pay me in cryptocurrency in order to get access to the book, the fact is that ultimately at some point you're going to have the plain text book in front of you, and at that point you can copy it, sidestep the blockchain completely, and go out and print off many copies again. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't some incredibly clever trick that none of us have thought of yet that would somehow mitigate that, but it just seems highly unlikely to me. So ultimately, I think blockchains can assist in the administration of intellectual property rights, possibly in the payment of royalties and things like that, for example, as well. and registering who owns what, and allowing you to transfer the ownership from one person to another in a decentralized manner. But what I don't think a blockchain is ever going to be able to do is stop infringement. And ultimately, it's being able to stop infringement that is what owning intellectual property is. So just a few thoughts. Hope you found it interesting. If you have any questions or comments, or you disagree entirely with me, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye for now.